Good morning. It's just after 5 a.m. here, and we are going to do a back to basics practice. So just a few movements to really focus in on how your body parts are, I like to say it, relating to each other, because so much that I've seen around reducing pain, what I found works so well is 1, improving the awareness of how your body moves. 2, being really, really clear on what your body is actually doing in the movement, where you're compensating, where you're not compensating, where movement's working, where it's not working, and then being able to shift it from there. Yeah. So it's movement is a really, really, really great place to play. Okay. So this is what we're going to do today. Legs up the wall, playing around with lots of hip stuff, and let's see where we get to. Okay. Legs up the wall. So I'm going to actually start with my legs up the door here, and then I'm going to scooch over to my mat just so you can see a little bit more clearly. So we're here on our backs, and just let your legs settle in to your body. What I like to say is, think about your legs being like wooden telephone poles and your pelvis being like mud. So your legs are sinking in to the mud, or the wooden telephone poles are sinking into the mud. And just let the weight of the legs sink. So you don't have to use your brain to pull your legs down. If imagery works for you, then you might just feel the legs as wooden telephone poles sitting or sinking into the mud. Yeah, good. And then while you're doing that, just get really, really clear on your breathing. And what's your breathing doing or not doing? And do your best not to change it. I find it so interesting how during a practice, or at the beginning, my breath might feel very slim, empty, full, trapped. I mean, it could be anything. But then as my body becomes more supple, my breath starts to change. Yeah, so just allow your breath to be what it is. Feel the foundation of what it is. Yeah, good. Okay, so now we're going to take one leg. Now here is the part which becomes interesting when we think about back to basics. So with a lot of what I teach, it's let's just be aware of what our body parts are actually doing. So you're going to take your one leg. I'm going to take my right leg. I'm going to cross it over my left. But I want you to notice if your pelvis moves. The movement, the articulating joint is leg bone in the pelvis here, and then it crosses and then it drops. Yeah? So the pelvis stays quiet. It doesn't rock up. It doesn't slip. It's just the leg bone moving. So just play with that and make sure you can feel that. And then feeling the pelvis again. So your hands are on your pelvis. Slide your leg down like that. And now you might not get down to the knee. Try to resist the urge of grabbing your hands, because if you use your hands to pull your leg down, now what you're doing is you are using your arms to pull your leg as opposed to having your hip tissue do that motion. So you don't need to wiggle it down. Getting the range is not what's going to help improve. Noticing where you're actually at will. Okay? And then from there, your leg bone, we're just going to rotate that leg bone in the pelvis. Pelvis is quiet. And then with my right hand, I'm taking my hand around to the back of my hip. I'll just call it my bum. And my other hand comes to the front of my hip. So as I move my leg, I'm just noticing that the muscles of my bum are what are moving my leg bone towards the wall, and that my front of my hip is staying quiet. It's not the one contracting to push my leg away. So I'm getting really clear on how this leg bone is actually moving in the hip socket. And the thing is you might be finding that your hip flexors are firing like crazy to push the leg out. You might be noticing that your leg bone moves a lot less than you thought it would. And so you're just looking at it and going, okay, that's my reality right now. And then try to only go as far as your hip flexors don't fire to move that leg. And know that as you practice, that leg will start to move more. You don't need to force it. And if your leg is below, if your foot is below the knee, you could always start to bend the other leg. But the thing is come to your pelvis and just make sure that your pelvis is staying on the ground. So it's not lifting up. I'm exaggerating it, but it's not creating space, nor are you having to push your pelvis down to the floor. Yeah? Okay. And then take that leg up. Now notice what you feel having done one side. And then cross the other ankle. Again, noticing that pelvis as you bring the leg down. And then begin to move. Now what's interesting sometimes I find with this is that sometimes the opposite leg, so the leg that's straight, that one will start to fire up the hip flexor because we might be doing some leveraging off of this ankle against the knee. There's this bit of pressure. So just notice on this side as well as on this side, the hip flexors have to be engaged at this point. They're not actively holding yourself in hip flexion. Okay, and then if you want to place your other hand at your bum. Good. Okay. And then leg comes up. Good. All right. Now let's bring the feet onto the wall and just rest with your feet onto the wall. I'm just going to look at one of the comments that have come up. Hold on a second. Hello from Pittsburgh. Okay. So your feet are going to be on the wall and scooch yourself back. So now that you have yourself at 90 and 90, yeah? Now sometimes people will turn their feet out, sometimes they'll keep their toes up. You choose what feels right for you, what feels good, and just be here. And again, I don't like watch that your feet don't come totally off, that you come onto the outside edges of your feet. So you still feel the ball of the foot, the base of the pinky toe, and the center of the heel, yeah? And then just let your legs settle into the pelvis. Really lovely. Okay, so now from here, you're going to have to watch closely on this one because it's interesting how we play with this. So we're going to take one leg and we're going to start to move it towards the wall. Now you may or may not have the same level of movement of the leg and hip socket. Don't worry. Just get the concept. So the leg will move along towards the floor, and then when it sort of stops, the other leg is going to follow. Okay, that's the first piece of this. Okay? So one leg moves, then the other leg moves. The reason why I bring that to attention is because sometimes people do this movement like this. They start here and their legs are kind of doing this. They're staying the same distance the whole time. And more what I want you to play with is that one leg goes, then the other leg follows. Then one leg goes and the other leg follows. Okay, so that's the first piece of this. So one leg goes, the other leg follows. One leg goes, the other leg follows. Okay, that's the first concept. Now, the other thing too, my feet are off the wall. You could come a little bit closer to the wall and just slide your feet along the wall. Like you could do something like that. Like that. You could do something like that, just so you know that that's possible if you need that extra support. Okay, now the next piece of this is what goes on with your pelvis, your ribs, and your shoulders. So the legs are doing their thing. The pelvis is following. Now watch what happens here. I could drop this knee straight to the floor, and then there's like this top knee is now behind the bottom knee. You could do that. What I'd like you to play with, if you're up for it, is This leg comes, this leg comes. Now the pelvis and the leg, this joint stays exactly the same. The pelvis comes around, the pelvis comes around, the pelvis comes around. Now, as that pelvis comes around, those knees are more on top of each other. So this movement becomes a pelvis motion, a rotation up through here. Now that might be really tough for you, right? That you might not have a whole lot of tissue suppleness to do that. Now watch what happens here. Pelvis moves around, pelvis moves around, pelvis moves around, pelvis moves around, right? So you might feel a bunch of stuff up and through here. So you determine what makes sense. Your shoulders are going to stay on the floor. So we're not going to lift the shoulder up as you go. The shoulder stays on the floor, shoulder stays on the floor. The shoulder blade's coming off, but the actual shoulder, like this piece of it here, that's staying on the floor. Yeah? Okay. So now you kind of play now. You get the idea that this leg leads, the other leg follows. This angle between this leg bone and the hip socket, that is one unit. Pelvis comes around, rib cage is moving, shoulder blade lifts off, and the shoulder stays on the ground. So kind of explore where you're at. Now, sometimes like we can be super limited in feeling really stiff and tight, like those feelings might be there. And they might correspond to your body not moving as much as you thought it might. So just like you might just be here, that's okay. You don't have to finish the whole range of motion. It's more about noticing leg, pelvis, ribs, shoulder. Yeah, just noticing that. You might go all the way, something like that. And you might not. So just notice where your body is at. Notice your breathing. Just notice. Notice your ribs and your pelvis. And the most important thing, I think, is that you just move as well as you can. You move in the range you can, and then you talk to yourself, if you can, in just the most glowing terms ever. Like really be gentle and kind with yourself. And if you're finding that you're not talking so kindly to yourself, then just notice that you're doing that and be kind to yourself about not being kind to yourself. I find that there tends to be this phase that we can go through when we recognize what kind of talk we have with ourselves and to just have compassion with the whole lot of it. We don't want to get on our cases about not getting on our cases, you know what I mean? Okay, I'm going to finish this up. Legs come back up the wall. Good, and now we're here. Okay, so I'm just going to move over to the door so you can see me more clearly. So we're back up the wall. And I want you now to notice what happens when you cross your ankle over now. And if you move any differently. Okay? If there's anything moving more easily, if there's anything moving more supplely, if not, yeah. Okay, good. And then coming back. All right, now let's bring the hands up to the sky. Take a look at your right hand. Index finger and the thumb tip are going to touch. Index finger and the thumb tip are going to touch. Elbows are going to bend like you're hugging a tree. Okay, now elbow is going to stay at the same ankle. The movement is going to come from our shoulder, the arm bone and the shoulder socket. We're going to bring those arms wide. So a tendency with this one is that someone will move through the elbows to come down. And I want you to focus in on that arm bone and the shoulder socket. Good. Now, let's rotate those arm bones in the shoulder socket. So it's going to look like your elbow is moving toward your legs, but the elbow's not doing it's moving, but the movement is being generated by the arm bone in the shoulder socket. So you might go here, you might go here, you might go here. Just watch if there's any extra strain up and through your arm. That's probably too far. So only go as far as you actually have ease there. And now take the arms wide. Check back in with your breath. There you go. And then bring the hands down. And then let's bring the legs down into a Baddha Konasana. Now you can be here on the wall, or if you would prefer, if you've had enough of legs up the wall, or if this is not comfortable, then push yourself back onto the floor into Shavasana. Or push yourself back onto the floor into a Baddha Konasana with your legs in Baddha Konasana on the floor. We'll be here for another 5 breaths. And when you finish those 5 breaths, then you can take your legs away and then bring yourself onto the floor and just stretch yourself out and just notice what you've done to yourself. This is what I love about Shavasana. You just get to notice what the heck just happened over those past few minutes. For us, it's been about 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes. So you just get to notice what the heck just happened. And what do you feel in your belly and in your back? In your shoulder girdle, in your hips, in your heart, in your breath. And you can stay here for as long as you'd like. Yeah? You might even want to do something a little bit more restorative or more vigorous. Maybe you want to go for a walk or a run, whatever it is that you do. Just take another 5 breaths before you transition. And you have a really, really, really great day. We'll see you tomorrow. Thank you for joining me. Take good care.